My husband abandoned me during my cancer treatment. My four-word response left him speechless. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. I never thought I would be the one facing cancer. At 34, I had my life planned perfectly, my career was stable, my home was warm, and I thought my marriage with Jason was strong. Then the diagnosis came. Early-stage breast cancer. My world turned upside down in a single moment. Jason was there at first. He held my hand during the first appointments, promised me he'd be by my side, and reassured me that everything would be okay. I believed him. I wanted to believe him because I needed that strength more than anything. But slowly, little cracks started appearing. He began to look tired when I called for him, delayed messages, and made excuses for why he couldn't come to certain treatments. The real betrayal hit me during my third chemotherapy session. I was exhausted, nauseous, scared, and alone in that sterile hospital room. I looked around for Jason, expecting to see his familiar face, hoping he'd hold my hand and tell me I was strong. But he wasn't there. He had left, claiming he needed to focus on his career. He didn't even hesitate to make that choice while I sat there, needles in my arm, shaking and scared. I felt my heart shatter in ways I couldn't describe. I couldn't believe that the person I had trusted the most, the person I had built my life with, could leave me in my darkest hour. Everything felt wrong, the smell of antiseptic, the beep of the monitors, even the friendly nurse's voice couldn't make it better. I felt abandoned. Not just physically, but emotionally. He didn't just leave the room, he left me entirely, and it was as if all the promises he ever made meant nothing. Sitting there, tears blurred my vision. I couldn't comprehend how someone who had vowed to stand by me could walk away so easily. The anger mixed with fear, grief mixed with disbelief. Every moment that passed without him there felt like a confirmation that I had been alone all along, even when I thought I wasn't. And yet, amid all that hurt, a small part of me began to awaken. A part that realized I couldn't let this betrayal define me. I knew I had to survive, not just the cancer, but the devastation of his abandonment. That's when the first spark of determination flickered. I promised myself I wouldn't break, I wouldn't beg, and I wouldn't let him see me falter. The room was silent except for the sound of my own steadying breath. I was alone, but for the first time, I felt the stirring of something stronger than fear, something that would carry me through the pain and eventually lead me to a place where I could respond in a way he would never forget. After that day in the hospital, everything felt heavier. Fear settled into my chest like a constant weight. Every morning, I woke up wondering if the treatments would work, if the cancer would come back, and if I would ever feel safe in my own life again. Pain wasn't just physical, it was emotional, the kind that made it hard to breathe or think straight. The silence of my home when Jason wasn't there made it even worse. My younger sister, Rachel, became my anchor. She sat with me during long nights when the pain was unbearable, brought me warm soup when I couldn't eat, and held my hand during moments when I thought I might fall apart. My friends also tried their best to fill the emptiness, calling every day, sending small messages, and showing up when they could. Without them, I don't know how I would have made it through. Jason's calls were few and far between. When he did call, his voice sounded distant, almost rehearsed. There was no warmth, no concern. Just cold words that reminded me how far he had drifted from the life we promised each other. He asked questions about my health but quickly changed the subject or ended the call when it became too emotional. I began to realize that these calls were not acts of love or care, they were empty gestures, meant to make himself feel better while leaving me in pain. At first, I felt angry, but then something inside me shifted. Anger turned into clarity. I didn't need his pity, and I didn't need his presence to survive. What I wanted wasn't a half-hearted apology or a shallow gesture of care. I wanted justice, I wanted dignity, and most of all, I wanted to prove to myself that I was stronger than his betrayal. There were nights when I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, whispering to myself, trying to hold on to any sense of hope. He thought I'd break. He underestimated me, I repeated over and over. Those words became a mantra, a small flame keeping me alive when everything around me felt like it was closing in. I realized that the fear and isolation weren't weaknesses, they were the soil where my strength could grow. Every tear I cried, every moment I felt weak, became fuel for the determination building inside me. I was learning that survival wasn't just about fighting cancer, it was about reclaiming control over my life and my emotions. By the time the next week came, I felt a quiet power rising within me. I still hurt, I still feared, but I was no longer just a victim. I was a woman who had faced betrayal and pain, who had felt abandoned, and who was beginning to understand that the strength to rise above it all had always been inside me. Jason might have walked away, but I was starting to walk towards something far stronger, myself. A few weeks after my chemotherapy started, I began noticing things that made my heart sink. Jason was no longer just distant on the phone, he was actively building a new life without me. I found out through a neighbor that he had been seeing a younger woman named Vanessa. At first, I couldn't believe it. I kept thinking maybe it was a misunderstanding, but the signs were everywhere. The real shock came when Vanessa showed up at our house while I was in the middle of a treatment. Rachel had gone with me to the hospital that day, and when we returned, there she was, smiling and acting like she belonged. Jason didn't seem ashamed, he barely acknowledged the situation. That moment broke something inside me, but it also lit a fire I didn't know I had. I realized then that this wasn't just about abandonment, it was a full betrayal. He had chosen someone else while I was fighting for my life. My anger and hurt were overwhelming, but I knew crying or yelling wouldn't change anything. I needed to act, to take control of the situation in a way that mattered. I started documenting everything quietly. Emails, text messages, missed calls, dates he skipped, and every small instance of his neglect became part of a record. I kept everything organized, not for revenge yet, but so I could see clearly the reality of his choices. Each message, each missed visit, each selfish excuse became proof that he had abandoned me when I needed him most. As I worked on gathering this evidence, something inside me shifted. I realized surviving cancer wasn't enough. I had already survived his betrayal in the sense that I hadn't broken completely, but now I wanted more. I wanted my life back fully, and I wanted to reclaim my power in the face of someone who had tried to take it from me. I started planning quietly, thinking about how I could show him that leaving me didn't make him stronger, it made me stronger. I thought about ways to protect myself emotionally, financially, and mentally. Each piece of evidence I collected reminded me that I didn't need him, and that his choices were what would eventually cost him more than me. By the time I finished documenting everything, I felt a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in months. The fear, pain, and anger were still there, but now they were balanced by determination. I wasn't just a survivor of cancer, I was becoming someone who would rise above betrayal, someone who could face him and the world with strength, dignity, and purpose. That realization was liberating. I knew my next steps wouldn't be easy, but I felt in my core that I would not let him define my life. I wouldn't just survive. I would come back stronger, smarter, and ready to reclaim the power he thought he had taken from me. As my treatments continued and my body slowly recovered, I decided it was time to take control of my life again. I couldn't change the past, and I couldn't make Jason care, but I could rebuild myself. I focused on my career, diving into projects I had put aside, determined to prove to myself that my life didn't depend on him. I also worked on my health, eating better, exercising when I could, and taking every small step to feel strong again. Mental strength became my priority, I refused to let betrayal and fear dominate my thoughts. While I was healing, I realized I could use the evidence I had gathered in a smart way. Jason thought he had left me powerless, but I knew that even small actions could make a big impact. Quietly, I began sharing details of his neglect with people who mattered in his world, but I did it anonymously. Friends, colleagues, and people in his professional circle received small truths about his behavior, how he abandoned his wife when she needed him most, how he ignored responsibilities, and how he acted selfishly. I made sure the information was subtle, not malicious. I didn't want to be obvious. I wanted him to feel the consequences of his choices, to experience the social discomfort of people questioning his character, without ever knowing where it came from. It was clever, almost invisible, but effective. Slowly, I noticed changes. People he once trusted began asking questions. Invitations to social events were fewer. His reputation started shifting in ways that puzzled him. At first, I watched quietly, almost like an observer. Each little ripple of discomfort he faced gave me a sense of satisfaction, not because I wanted to hurt him personally, but because I was reclaiming control. He had treated me like I was powerless, and now I was proving that even quietly, carefully, I could make an impact. The most satisfying part was that he had no idea it was me. Every reaction, every awkward conversation he had with people, made me feel my strength growing. I wasn't loud or dramatic. I wasn't exposing him in a way that could backfire. I was simply using the truth as my tool, letting him experience the consequences of his actions in a subtle, undeniable way. For the first time since the diagnosis, I felt a sense of power that wasn't tied to anger or revenge alone. It was power rooted in dignity, intelligence, and patience. I wasn't acting out of spite, I was taking what was rightfully mine, control over my own life and over the narrative of my story. This small, careful step marked the beginning of something bigger. I wasn't just surviving or healing, I was actively shaping my future. And in the quiet, unnoticed ways, Jason was starting to feel the effects of abandoning me. It was my first taste of true, calculated empowerment, and it only made me hungrier for the freedom and justice I knew I deserved. Once I started feeling stronger, both physically and mentally, I decided to take a step I had been putting off for years. I invested in a small real estate project I had always dreamed about but never had the courage to pursue. It was risky, but I wanted something that belonged entirely to me, something that would prove I could create a life on my own terms. As the project progressed, I poured all my energy into it. I learned quickly, made smart decisions, and began seeing real results. The property started to gain value, tenants were happy, and for the first time in a long while, I felt completely in control of something important. The satisfaction wasn't just financial, it was a sign that I could rebuild my life completely, without needing anyone else to prop me up. Jason, of course, noticed. At first, he acted surprised when he heard about the project. Then the call started, short, hesitant, and oddly nostalgic. He pretended to care, asking how I was doing, trying to reconnect as if nothing had happened. He even tried to apologize, saying he had been wrong, that he hadn't understood how much he hurt me. I listened quietly, feeling the old stirrings of anger and hurt, but I didn't respond. Not yet. Every word he said reminded me of all the times he abandoned me, all the promises he broke, and all the pain he caused while I fought for my life. I realized that nothing he said or did now could erase that. In my mind, I repeated the words I had prepared long ago, the words that would make him finally understand that I wasn't the same woman he left behind. I deserve so much. For simple words that carried all the strength, dignity, and self-respect I had built since the day he walked away. I could feel the power shifting between us. Before, he had all the control. He could leave, manipulate, and abandon without consequences. Now, it was different. I was the one moving forward, the one building something meaningful, the one who didn't need him at all. He reached out pretending to care, but I had already moved past him. His remorse didn't matter. My life was no longer tied to his approval or attention. As I watched him struggle to reconnect, I understood how far I had come. I wasn't bitter, I wasn't seeking revenge in the traditional sense. I was simply living a life that proved I was stronger than he ever imagined. Every step I took in that real estate project, every decision I made for myself, reminded me that I controlled my own future. And in that silence, I knew he would never forget those 4 words when they came. They weren't just words, they were a statement of everything I had earned, everything I had survived, and everything I would continue to achieve without him. I deserve so much. It was my truth, and nothing he could say or do would change it. A few months later, I decided to take a bold step. I organized a charity gala to benefit cancer patients, something I had wanted to do for a long time. It was important to me to help others while also showing that I could create something meaningful on my own. The event was elegant, full of supporters, friends, and local community leaders who admired the work I had done since my diagnosis. I knew Jason would hear about it, and I wanted him to see me thriving. So, I invited him. Not to reconcile, not to apologize, but to witness the life he had abandoned. I made it clear in the invitation that it was an opportunity to support a cause, leaving the rest unspoken. Jason, believing he might mend the damage, accepted. He probably thought this was his chance to step back into my life without effort. The night of the gala, I watched everything unfold with calm and focus. Guests mingled, sharing stories of survival and support. Mutual friends and staff subtly brought up moments that reminded everyone of the struggles I had endured, how I fought cancer alone, the absence of a partner when it mattered most, and the courage it took to keep going despite betrayal. The stories weren't attacks, they were truths, quietly shared in a way that left an impression. Jason's face changed as he realized he was the subject of these conversations, though no one directly blamed him. Friends exchanged glances, staff whispered their admiration for my strength, and the energy in the room reflected respect for the journey I had been through. He shifted uncomfortably, trying to smile, trying to laugh at jokes, but the truth lingered in the air. I didn't speak a single word about him. I didn't need to. The weight of his absence and the reality of his betrayal spoke louder than anything I could have said. Every glance, every hushed conversation, every acknowledgement of my accomplishments reminded him, and everyone else, how he had failed me. Watching him squirm quietly, I felt a deep sense of justice. Not revenge fueled by anger, but the satisfaction that came from living well, standing strong, and letting the truth speak for itself. It was powerful to realize that karma doesn't always shout, it often shows itself quietly, in ways people cannot ignore. By the end of the night, the gala was a success. Cancer patients received support, the community celebrated courage, and I felt an overwhelming sense of empowerment. Jason left feeling exposed without understanding why, carrying the discomfort of being confronted with his own failures while I walked away with grace and dignity. That evening proved something important: strength isn't always loud. Sometimes, the most devastating impact comes from showing the world your resilience, letting others see the truth, and letting someone else face the consequences of their own choices without having to say a word. After the gala, I realized that my journey wasn't just about proving something to Jason, it was about becoming the person I wanted to be. I focused on strengthening my emotional resilience. I started attending therapy regularly, joining support groups where people shared their struggles and triumphs. Listening to others who had faced betrayal, illness, and loss helped me understand that healing wasn't just physical, it was mental and emotional too. It was in one of these sessions that I met Dr. Lauren Bennett. She became more than a counselor, she became a mentor. She taught me that dignity and preparation were the most powerful forms of revenge. You didn't need to shout, threaten, or expose someone publicly to show your strength. Living well, being prepared for life, and holding yourself to your own standards were far more devastating than any confrontation. Her words stuck with me, shaping the way I approached every decision and interaction with Jason. As I grew stronger, Jason tried to re-enter my life again, but this time in a different way. He attempted to manipulate me through guilt, sending messages that suggested I had made him miserable, reminding me of moments from our past, and implying that I owed him forgiveness. I read them quietly, letting the words sink in, but I didn't respond. His tactics no longer had the power to shake me. Each message he sent only reminded me why I had chosen this path, why I had invested in myself, my career, and my independence. I smiled quietly when I read his words, a small, private acknowledgement of my own strength. I wasn't angry or desperate to prove anything. I simply understood that his attempts were weak compared to the life I was building for myself. Therapy and mentoring sessions helped me see patterns I hadn't noticed before. I learned to recognize manipulation without reacting to it, to maintain my boundaries, and to focus on what truly mattered. Every decision I made became intentional, guided by my own goals rather than the fear or approval of someone who had abandoned me. I began to notice the shift in myself. Where fear and pain had once ruled, there was now confidence and calm. Where I had once looked for validation from Jason, I now found it in my accomplishments and my resilience. I was unshakable, not because I had stopped feeling, but because I had learned to control my response, to keep my dignity, and to prepare myself for whatever came next. By the end of this phase, I realized that true power doesn't come from hurting someone else. It comes from rising above betrayal, protecting yourself, and living in a way that makes anyone who underestimated you realize too late what they lost. Jason could try all the guilt and manipulation he wanted, but I was no longer the same person. I had grown, and my life was moving forward, without him. It happened one afternoon at my office. I was finishing up a meeting when Jason appeared at the doorway, unannounced. The sight of him made my chest tighten, but I stayed calm. He walked in, trying to act casual, but the tension in his voice betrayed him. He demanded a second chance, saying he had realized his mistakes, that he missed me, and that he wanted to make things right. For a moment, I just listened. He tried every tactic, pleading, charm, reminders of the past, but I didn't flinch. I could see through the act, and I knew that nothing he said could undo the years of betrayal, the months of abandonment, or the strength I had built since then. Finally, I spoke. I looked him directly in the eye and delivered the words I had been holding on to for months, the words that carried all my pain, my strength, and my dignity. I am moving on. For simple words, calm but firm, carrying a weight he couldn't ignore. Jason froze. His mouth opened slightly, as if he wanted to argue, but no words came out. He looked at me like he was seeing someone he didn't recognize, someone stronger, someone untouchable. Every manipulation he had tried over the past months had failed, and now he had to face it. The room was quiet except for the hum of the office air conditioning. I didn't need to explain, to justify, or to convince him of anything. The sentence said it all. I was no longer his, I was no longer tied to his choices, and I would not let him control or affect my life anymore. As I watched him struggle for a response, I felt a sense of release. For so long, I had carried fear, anger, and hurt inside me, but in that moment, all of it transformed into clarity and freedom. He realized, finally, that abandoning me didn't give him power, it revealed my strength. I didn't shout, I didn't yell, and I didn't cry. I simply stood there, composed and confident, letting the words sink in. That calmness, that quiet conviction, was the most devastating force I could wield. Jason left without another word, defeated not through confrontation, but through the simple truth that I no longer needed him, that I had moved beyond his influence entirely. After he left, I felt lighter than I had in years. There was no triumph in revenge, no satisfaction in anger, just a deep, undeniable sense of empowerment. I had faced betrayal, abandonment, and manipulation, and I had survived. More than survived, I had grown, and in doing so, I had reclaimed control over my life. In that moment, I understood something essential: true strength doesn't come from confrontation or revenge. It comes from moving forward, from embracing your own life, and from realizing that no one who left you in your darkest hour has the power to take away your future. I was free, I was strong, and I had finally moved on. After the confrontation, I knew it was time to fully take charge of my life. I moved into my new home, a place that felt completely mine. Every room was decorated to my taste, every detail chosen to reflect who I had become. It was bright, warm, and full of life, the exact opposite of the loneliness and fear I had felt before. Walking through it, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. I spent time reconnecting with my friends and family. Rachel, my sister, was still my closest support, and now we laughed together more than we had in months. Friends who had stood by me during the hardest times were celebrated and cherished. I realized how much stronger my relationships had become when built on honesty, care, and mutual respect. Being surrounded by people who genuinely cared reminded me that life could be beautiful even after betrayal. Jason, of course, was still a part of my past, but he was no longer part of my present or future. From what I heard through mutual acquaintances, he was living in regret, realizing he had lost someone who had been stronger, wiser, and far more resilient than he had ever imagined. The choices he made while I was fighting for my life had permanent consequences. Knowing this gave me no joy in a cruel way, it was simply a fact that reassured me I had made the right choices for myself. Living on my own, I discovered freedom in ways I hadn't anticipated. I could make decisions without fear or compromise. I could plan my days around things that brought me joy, not obligation. I could focus on my career, my health, and my personal growth without anyone trying to pull me down. Every moment reinforced the truth that betrayal cannot define a person. Only the strength to rise above it can. I often reflected on everything I had endured: cancer, abandonment, manipulation, and heartbreak. Each challenge had shaped me, taught me resilience, and clarified what I truly valued. I understood now that true power isn't about getting revenge or proving someone wrong. It's about building a life so strong and full that no one's mistakes or betrayals can take it away. In my new home, surrounded by light, warmth, and laughter, I felt a profound sense of triumph. I had survived the hardest trials of my life and come out not only intact but stronger. My journey had transformed me, and the freedom I felt was not just physical or financial, it was emotional, mental, and spiritual. Jason had lost me, but I had found myself. That was the ultimate victory. I no longer carried anger, fear, or doubt. I carried confidence, clarity, and strength. I understood that life's hardships could shape us, but only we could decide how. My strength defined me now, and it was far more powerful than any betrayal had ever been. The day finally came for my last checkup at the hospital. Walking into the familiar halls, I felt a sense of calm and completion I hadn't experienced in years. The treatments were over, my body had healed, and the doctors confirmed I was fully recovered. Sitting in that room, I allowed myself to breathe deeply, to take in the fact that I had survived both the illness and everything that came with it: the fear, the betrayal, and the heartbreak. As I left the hospital, memories of the past months played in my mind. I remembered the pain of Jason abandoning me, the loneliness during treatments, and the nights spent questioning if I would ever feel whole again. I remembered the anger and sadness, but also the small victories: finishing each round of chemotherapy, gaining strength with every day, and learning to trust my own decisions. Every step of the journey had shaped me, teaching lessons I could never have learned any other way. I reflected on the way I handled the betrayal. I could have reacted in anger or bitterness, but I chose something different. I focused on preparation, dignity, and self-worth. I rebuilt my life, my career, and my confidence. I held on to my integrity even when I had every reason to lash out. And in doing so, I realized that true empowerment doesn't come from hurting someone else, it comes from rising above the challenges, protecting your own heart, and living fully despite what others have done to you. Thinking about Jason, I understood that his loss wasn't a punishment I delivered, it was a natural consequence of his choices. I didn't need to orchestrate revenge or prove anything to him. The life I had built, the independence I had gained, and the peace I felt were proof enough. My dignity, preparation, and self-respect had created a life no betrayal could take away. Walking out into the sunlight, I felt lighter than I had in years. I had learned to value myself above anyone else's approval. I had discovered that strength isn't just surviving, it's thriving in a world that tried to break you. It's making choices that honor your journey and your worth. And as I thought about everything I had endured, I couldn't help but ask myself, and anyone listening to my story, the same question that now defines my journey: if the person you trusted most abandoned you, how far would you go to reclaim your life? It's a question that doesn't have an easy answer, but the truth is simple: reclaiming your life isn't about revenge. It's about understanding your own value, preparing for your future, and moving forward with dignity. That is the power no betrayal can ever take away. That is the freedom I have finally earned.